All right. Hey, class, how's it going? Here we are in Unit 6. So I'm pretty excited about this unit. There is a lot of stuff. I'm guessing many of you have covered some of the content that we're going to review here in American history and in some of your American literature courses. But this is going to be a fairly different look at it with the intensity that we're going to be looking at art from the American Romantic period. And so, just a quick review of American Romanticism. We know that it prioritizes ingenuity, intuition, youthful thinking, resourcefulness, along with the prominence of nature and the sublime, and the role and the importance of the individual's reactions. And as always, it's a reaction or a rejection against certain elements of the Enlightenment and rationalism. And now we're going to explore really the Americanized version of what happened to Romanticism after it left Germany and England and ended up in the United States. What did it look like? And France, for that matter. What did it look like? And as you know from the last chapter in the reading, we're also quickly moving towards this notion of realism. And the Civil War will be a real marker for realism. So this period that we're going to be looking at is going to be roughly actually, let's just say 1800 to about 1860. It starts a little bit later. 1830 might be a little bit late, but so that's going to be the American Romantic period. So what I want to talk about first here is literature. We're going to be looking at a lot of literature of this particular era and period. We're going to be talking about Washington Irving, Rip Van Winkle, the Sleepy Hollow. Some of you know these. We're going to be looking at Herman Melville, Moby Dick, Henry David Thoreau, and Ralph Waldo Emerson, and how they take these romantic ideas and rewrap them into a completely Americanized experience and interpretation, adaptation, you could call it, of Romanticism. So when we take a look here, there's something that you're going to pop up. That's going to pop up in the reading that's called transcendentalism, and this is going to be mostly, at least in the way the textbook covers it, we're going to be looking at Emerson and Henry David Thoreau, and they're both authors who were pretty prominent philosophers in the transcendentalism movement. So transcendentalism is really just, it's slightly more complex than this, but to oversimplify it, transcendentalism is American Romanticism. But there's a little bit of a shift here that's quite interesting because the transcendentalists, especially Emerson and Thoreau, philosophically are going to take a romanticism and the concept of romanticism and truly move it into something new and morph it into something fairly different than that European romanticism we've been looking at. And so I want to bring up a term here that's called transatlanticism. So up until this point in American history, from the point of the Revolution, Declaration of Independence, and all the early stuff that we were looking at, we move into this period for a long time up until the early 1800s, mid 1800s, where most of our art, and when I say art in this class, I think you all are starting to pick up on this, but this art is going to include literature, music, obviously painting and sculpture. In some cases, as we've studied, architecture, and anything that represents a human creation, we're going to put under this umbrella of art. But then also, along with art, we can also put philosophy as sort of its own item that we've been studying. All of these things would come from across the Atlantic. They'd come from England and France and Spain, the literature, the music, the painting, the architecture. And as Americans, we would absorb it and we would just adopt it. And yeah, we would send some iteration or version, our own adaptation of it back to Europe, but mostly it was kind of a one way street. And obviously, the same thing went for the production of a lot of goods. A lot of goods would come across the Atlantic and come to the Americas. And this is referred to roughly as transatlanticism. But I will argue that with the birth of transcendentalism, and this is in some ways, um, it's more of a token adjustment, but transatlanticism is going to be the birth of a philosophy that is entirely American. And the rest of the world is going to look at it and say, that's something new. That's something interesting. And we're going to see this across, not just in transcendental philosophy, but we're going to see it move into our art, the way in which we write novels, the topics that we cover in novels. We're going to see towards the end of the Civil War. Civil War is going to end in 1865. And by the early 1900s, we're going to have a whole slew of Americanized music, and the roots of jazz and blues are going to start seeping out of North America and into the rest of the world. And so this is really, I would say, the birth of American originality. And I think that Romanticism and that rugged individualism that is so prized by both the American self mythology, and I mean that in the most endearing way, um, that American mythologized rugged individualism is going to lead to a destruction or a reduction in the potency of this transatlantic thought. And it's going to move us into a very Americanized philosophical and artistic identity. And so Emerson and Thoreau, as I've suggested, are going to really be some of the pioneers of this shift in this change in perspective. And here are some famous quotes. These are mostly Thoreau quotes, but Emerson is just as important, as you'll learn throughout our unit. But envy is ignorance, imitation is suicide. And this is Ralph Waldo Emerson talking about the role of the individual, and that you shouldn't run around envying people and you shouldn't imitate them, because as soon as you imitate them, you give up or kill off something of yourself. And so he says imitation is suicide. But if you look at transatlanticism, what I was just talking about, it's the epitome of that, is that we were constantly imitating European taste and European art and European ideals. And all of a sudden, around this time period in the United States, people are saying, yeah, no, I think we're going to be us. We're going to do our own thing over here. And so we start getting some of these, what even at the time, I mean, these were considered highly radical thoughts. But as you can see now, these are seeped in regardless of which side of the political spectrum a person might be on. These are pretty universally accepted notions of Americanism at this point. And this one is, our life is frittered away by detail. Simplify, simplify. So Henry David Thoreau often argued that we needed far simpler lives and less stuff. And I know many of us don't actually live by that, but that is very much an ideal, to live simply. Under a government which imprisons any unjustly, the true place for a just man is also a prison. And so this is going to be in his book Civil Disobedience. Both of these quotes are going to come from here as essay Civil Disobedience. And interestingly enough, civil disobedience is going to be the Thoreau's philosophy is going to be what Gandhi uses to overthrow or to diminish the power of the British Empire in India, and it's going to be what Martin Luther King Jr. uses as a way to further his goals in the civil rights movement and the goals of the entire civil rights movement. And so Henry David Thoreau, that government is best, which governs least. And then finally, Henry David Thoreau and Emerson and all of the transcendentalists started to recognize some of the environmental degradation that had been occurring in Europe, and really did not want to see that occur in the United States at the same level. And so when they saw the railroads coming in, Henry David Thoreau was very skeptical over the positive impacts of industrialism in the railroads. That goes back to their romantic tendencies, that a person's individuality and intuition and raw emotion and access to the sublime and the picturesque all come through nature. And so the very destruction of nature is the very destruction of God and the divine, and the very destruction of all things that allow humanity to become moral. Because remember, much like the Romantics, one didn't gain morality by studying books, according to the Transcendental or the Romantic. One became moral or became an improved individual by sublime experience in the natural world. And so, what's use of a fine house if you haven't got a tolerable planet to put it on? And so, all of this is the birth of the environmental movement. This is it. This is where, oh, I'm slaughtering that. Don't worry about that. This is where the environmental movement comes together and starts to the creation of national parks, the formal creation of national parks, the creation of Central Park, and the creation of all these green spaces will arise out of the witness destruction of a lot of natural resources on the East Coast around this time period. And then it'll, continue to impact the rest of the United States as national parks and different plots of land are set aside in preservation, because the preservation of that nature to a transcendental from this period is the preservation of God and the preservation of nature. So that's Henry David Thoreau, Transatlanticism, where we're moving. Obviously, this period of American Romanticism will come to a screeching halt and constantly be bumping into reality and the realism of abolition, the Civil War, the way in which race is going to dominate the American experience and discussion, all the way from the early slave trade. As we well know, up until present day, that race continues to be a prominent factor in American identity and understanding our history. So, in here, we'll look at Frederick Douglass, Harriet Beecher Stowe, author of Uncle Tom's Cabin. And then at the very end, Mark Twain will come in with Huckleberry Finn. But Mark Twain is based on a realist perspective, not romantic. Mark Twain will actually go out of his way in his books to figuratively kill off romanticism. And so if you want to study that with me, you'll need to join me in American literature at some semester in the future. But Mark Twain and Huckleberry Finn is unlike the romantic, which you have a romantic hero that runs out and does dashing and daring things and saves the day and all of those sorts of things. In Huckleberry Finn, we have a ignorant, racist, illiterate little white boy who we really find endearing, along with an illiterate, uneducated black man who becomes the moral center of the story. And so, first time that a black character has been the moral center of a story. And both of these characters and all of their flaws and all of their beauty are all pulled together there. And, what I would say is one of the first pop realist novels in American literature. So that marks the end, even though it's discussed in our text. That marks the end of this period, the Romantic period. So, welcome to Unit 6. As always, let me know if you have any questions.